promise again. Yemen's president says he will sign a Gulf brokered plan for him to leave office. Unity Court. Greek Prime Minister says political consensus is vital if Greece is to keep the euro. Death of a rebel. Colombia's president confirms the killing of FARC leader Alfonso Cano. And the power of religion. Up to 3 million Muslims from across the world arrived in Mecca as part of the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Hello there, welcome to CCTV News. I'm Pandeng in Beijing. Libya's weapons stockpile is a major challenge for the transitional authority in maintaining peace and stability. The UN Security Council has expressed deep concern of the fate of the artillery. Meanwhile, injuries and deaths have been reported. Su Yuting has more.
The Libyan authorities have tried several times to disarm the civilian fighters, but things are not that easy. It is not strange to see vehicles with bullet holes in Tripoli. Even during the daytime, there are armed personnel patrolling the streets.
Sometimes they shoot at night, leaving some innocent civilians injured or even dead.
Meanwhile, some Libyans don't want to hand over their weapons due to security concerns. Ahmed Said was a fighter once battling in Bani Walid. He says he hopes to keep his gun to ensure safety.
We endured NATO's air attacks on Tripoli earlier, and now we are still worried that Gaddafi's backers will return. Actually, we're all ordinary civilians. No one likes to hold guns.
Numerous weapons have flooded into Libya, causing an even greater threat. Fears are growing that arms could fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda and other militant groups. With the country awash with weaponry, disarming the population and creating a safe future for Libya is still a tough challenge. Su Yuting, CCTV.
To Syria now. Tank fire has killed 5 civilians and wounded dozens in Homs. Meanwhile, in Cairo, the Arab League chief said the organization was seriously concerned by ongoing violence and appealed to Damascus to abide by steps agreed with Arab states to protect civilians and set Syria on the course of dialogue. The latest violence in Homs brought the death toll in the city to 82 since Tuesday. Syrian authorities say security forces are fighting militant gangs who have been killing civilians and prominent figures in Homs. Syria has suffered from an oil embargo imposed by the European Union in September. In the 2 months since then, the country has suffered a great shortage of diesel. Let's take a look.
Syria's busy streets. Sahib is a painter in Damascus, the capital of Syria. He now cannot buy diesel anywhere. He has no choice but to buy an electronic heater as the winter is coming, although he knows that electricity is much more expensive than diesel.
Waiting from morning till evening, you can only get 20 liters of diesel.
Due to the present diesel shortage, the government has rationed the amount of diesel everyone can have. According to economist Dr. Hussein Amak, the diesel price on the official market has remained unchanged, but it's very difficult to obtain. While the diesel price on the black market has been driven up by 30 to 40%. Many people think the EU embargo is the reason for the shortage.
The embargo paralyzed the import of oil products into Syria, and therefore it's not unusual to see a severe diesel shortage.
1/3 of refined oil supplies in Syria are from EU countries, and Syria has suffered from the oil embargo imposed by the European Union 2 months ago. Since the embargo, the EU has prohibited its member countries from exporting oil products to Syria. The EU also bans its members from importing crude oil from Syria. The oil industry takes up 20% of Syria's GDP. Before the embargo, Syria produced 380,000 barrels of crude oil. 100,000 of them were exported. And 90% of the exported oil was transported to EU countries like Germany and Italy. It was the main source of Syria's foreign reserves. Since the embargo, the production of crude oil in Syria has decreased by 1/3, and none of it has been exported. Paul Crow, CCTV.
Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh announced he will leave office in line with a Gulf brokered power transfer deal. On Saturday, Saleh said the country's vice president is working to complete a dialogue with the opposition and sign the Gulf Initiative and its operational mechanism. He said the goal was to achieve a legitimate, peaceful and democratic transition and conduct early presidential elections. Saleh had 3 times agreed to sign a deal, only to back out at the very last minute each time. Israel says an airstrike has killed a Palestinian militant and wounded 2 others in southern Gaza. A military spokesman said the attack was targeting militants who were preparing to fire a rocket into Israel. The militant group Islamic Jihad said the 3 men hurt in the attack belonged to their organization. Islamic Jihad traded deadly fire with Israel last week. 12 Palestinian gunmen and 1 Israeli civilian were killed. The fighting ended only after neighboring Egypt brokered a ceasefire with both parties. The Israeli Navy has boarded 2 Gaza-bound boats carrying pro-Palestinian activists, enforcing a blockade it regards as necessary to prevent weapons smuggling. But Hamas says they will breach the blockade whether the boats arrive or are stopped at the sea. Sinan has more.
The latest interception involves a Canadian boat and an Irish boat carrying a small amount of medical supplies. Aiming to breach Israel's naval blockade, they sailed from Turkey on Wednesday and were stopped less than 100 kilometers from the Gaza coast. The Israeli military says its Marines took every precaution necessary to ensure no one was injured during the operation. It also says action was only taken after the 2 boats refused to turn around or unload their supplies in Israel or Egypt, and continued sailing towards Gaza coast. Meanwhile, activists in Gaza have been waiting for the possible arrival of the 2 vessels, a mission dubbed as Freedom Waves.
Freedom Waves boats are heading to this port to once again confront the high walls of occupation and yell out a message to the world. Collective punishment is illegal. Blockade is unacceptable.
Hamas leader in Gaza says the goal of breaching the blockade will be reached, citing the political implications of the 2 boats with activists from several Western countries on abroad.
We appreciate highly those activists who came in solidarity, and we stress their goal is being achieved, whether they arrived or not, because they expose the occupation and scandalize it.
Israel put the embargo in force when Hamas seized control of the territory in 2007. The latest challenge comes during a period of tension in the eastern Mediterranean. In May 2010, Israeli commandos boarded a Turkish Gaza-bound flotilla, killing 9 Turks. Turkey was angered by Israel's refusal to apologize, which led to the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador to Ankara 2 months ago. Also disappointing Turkey is the UN inquiry into the accident, saying the blockade was a legitimate security measure and that its implementation complied with the requirements of international law. Sinan, CCTV.
Israel's president has called on the world to do whatever it takes to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. Shimon Peres didn't call for military action, but he didn't rule it out.
It would seem that Iran is getting closer to nuclear weapons. In the time that remains, I don't know if it's a year, half a year, or 3/4 of a year. We must approach the other nations of the world to tell them, here the time has come to keep the promise. We should turn to the nations of the world to fulfill your promises.
Iran has lodged a complaint to the UN regarding U.S. accusations that it tried to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington. Iran's Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi said on Saturday that one of the alleged plotters, the U.S. calls an Iranian military official, is actually a member of a group recognized as a terrorist organization both by Tehran and Washington. Salehi also says the plot is part of a multi-pronged U.S. strategy to smear Tehran, a process he says will continue next week when the UN nuclear agency publishes a report claiming new evidence about Iran's nuclear program. Troops from the largest U.S. military base in southern Iraq, Imam Ali, have been continuing to pack equipment and vehicles. The move is part of the whole withdrawal operation that will see all American ground forces out of the country by the end of the year. Yao Hong has more.
U.S. troops have stepped up their pullout from Iraq as December 31st deadline for withdrawal approaches. Nearly 40,000 U.S. troops still remain in Iraq at present, but they will be pulled out in line with the timetable announced by U.S. President Barack Obama. Preparing to hand over dozens of bases to the Iraqis, they are disposing of or shipping out thousands of vehicles, generators, air conditioners, and other items.
Right now, currently, we're in the process of moving our troops, reposturing our forces out of Iraq to meet the security agreement signed in 2008, and saying that all forces will be out of Iraq by December 31st of this year. Currently, we've had approximately 1,000 soldiers from our unit depart Iraq on their way back to the United States, and over 1,000 pieces of equipment so far.
The withdrawal of American troops marks a major milestone in the war that started in 2003. The United States handed over all combat duties to Iraqi security forces in August, moving into an advisory and assistant role to Iraq's army and police. However, they still come under fire from time to time and shoot back. U.S. forces have not legally been able to conduct unilateral operations in Iraq since a bilateral security pact came into force in 2009. And then most of them began switching their focus to training Iraqis when they pulled out of towns on June 30, 2009. Yao Hong, CCTV.
You're watching CCTV News. Coming up. Down to the wire. Guatemala gears up to choose a new president, with both the remaining two candidates promising to get tough on law and order. A unity core, the Greek Prime Minister says political consensus is vital if Greece is to keep the euro. Security has tightened in Nicaragua on Saturday on the eve of a national election. Many opposition candidates are calling unconstitutional. Incumbent Socialist President Daniel Ortega looks set to win another term in office after a divisive Supreme Court ruling in 2009 that overturned a constitutional ban on consecutive re-election. Allegations of corruption are rife as ballot papers are distributed nationwide. The European Union has deployed more than 80 observers to the country to monitor the vote. The head of the delegation has expressed concern of allegations of collusion between Ortega and officials within the electoral body. Still in Latin America, and final preparations are also underway for Sunday's presidential runoff in Guatemala. Voters will choose between two right-leaning candidates, Otto Perez Molina, a former general promising to get tough on law and order, and Manuel Bordizon, a populist tycoon whose proposals include social programs and zero tolerance on crime. Polls currently show Molina some 10 points ahead on the eve of the election. The Greek Prime Minister says his country now has to come to a political consensus to approve it wants to keep the euro after holding emergency talks with the country's president. Paul Crow has the story.
Critical negotiations on a new Greek coalition government will begin soon, Prime Minister George Papandreou says after talks with the country's president. Papandreou's meeting with President Kyrilos Papoulias marks the launch of his push for a new coalition government to save the nation from bankruptcy. When he emerged from the meeting at the president's office in Athens, Papandreou told a scrum of waiting journalists that a lack of consensus would worry European partners over the country's willingness to stay within the Eurozone.
This agreement of October 26th and implementation of steps stemming from this decision is a precondition for staying in the euro. These are very significant moments. In order to create the wider cooperation, the necessary context and procedures will take place soon.
In a late-night speech to Parliament, Papandreou said the new coalition should be formed to ram the €130 billion bailout deal through the Assembly. The deal is seen as the last financial lifeline for a nation that is due to run out of money in December. Without saying when he might quit, Papandreou said he was ready to discuss who should lead the new government, which would rule until elections, probably early next year. Paul Crow, CCTV.
Meanwhile, Greece's main opposition leader, Antonis Samaras, has rejected the Prime Minister's coalition offer, saying elections must take place and that George Papandreou must resign.
To send a message to everyone, both in Greece and in Europe. We accept the haircut decision. We accept the goals of the agreement. We also accept the structural reforms. We ask only one thing,